All right. Today's lesson is kind of an interesting one. I have been working on trying to put together the content for the book, and in some of the work that I've done with that, I kind of came back onto this story or this concept, and it kept kind of resurfacing as I was putting the content together, and I just thought, this is something that I think is really, really important, and I think kind of gets missed in the whole health and fitness genre as we kind of look at what we're doing here, and I think it'll really help you. When I was younger, 15, 16, I lived in Mississippi. And one of the things we do in Mississippi is we hunt. We get our shotguns and we go out and hunt. And so I had really just moved down to Mississippi and, really had not really fired a weapon or done anything with guns before. So I was kind of new to some of this stuff. But we were going to go out and go dove hunting. I had a little 410 single shot, nothing massive. But we're going to go hunting and we're going to go dove hunting. Now, I'd already been deer hunting and killed a deer. So dove hunting really didn't super excite me. But it was something that was just kind of interesting to do in the fall on a weekend when there was no football season or anything going on. So we're out and about, and we're walking. And the way you kind of hunt dove is to flush them out. Now, a lot of people will use dogs to do that. We didn't have dogs to do that. So we would basically walk through the woods, try to flush them out ourselves. Now, invariably, when you walk up on some doves and you flush them out, they just shoot off, like 3 or 4 of them in different directions, as many as 4 or 5 in different directions. And so we're walking through the woods, and again, this is my first time dove hunting. And I kind of walk in, and we'll walk up on a bush, and all of a sudden, poof, and they make this cooing sound, and they just take off, like I said, in about 4 or 5 different directions. And as the dove took off, my mind was doing 1,000 different things. It was thinking, which dove is the best dove? Which dove, is the easiest for me to get? Well, all these different thoughts were going through my head until I realized that the dove were gone, and I'd not even fired a shot. I had spent so much time focused on which dove to shoot and how to shoot the dove and all the other things about any of the doves, all the doves, that I never really pulled the trigger. And so I had zero chance of accomplishing anything because I was kind of locked into this whole which dove. And I think we've seen these in other quotes. You probably heard, you can't see the forest for the trees, or a bird in the hand is worth 2 in a bush. These are similar kind of concepts of, you need to kind of focus on one thing if you're going to get it. So the lesson I learned out of that and going forward was when you go dove hunting or rabbit hunting or anything where you're going to flush something out, and there's going to be multiple things for you to chase, so to speak, the rabbit hole, but there's a ton of different ways to go with this. Focus on one thing and make that one thing happen. But before you do that, and something I couldn't do with dove hunting, but they do very much with deer hunting. If you come up on several deer, they will actually do this, is that they'll look for which is the best buck of the lot, and which one should we go after. And so the concept of that is what I call big rocks. And I'm not the one to do this. It was actually an experiment that was done, not experiment so much as a kind of a lesson that was done. And it's used a lot now in businesses when they're doing kind of their team building, teaching, coaching kind of meetings where they'll pull everybody together. And what this particular guy did was he got everybody in there, and he had these, and I actually had someone do this with me. That's why I know about this kind of experiment. Was he had a jar of sand, he had a jar of these little pebbles, and he had a jar of some larger stones. And there were 3 jars, and then he had this other jar that was actually when you looked at it sitting there, it really was only slightly larger than all 3 of the other jars combined. And so he asked people to come up and commence to try to put all of those rocks and sand and pebbles, all of that into that one jar. And people would go up there and they would try something, and it wouldn't work. And then another group would come up and try. And so basically he had a few groups come up, and then he says, okay, let me show you. And here's what he did. He took the big rocks and he put those in the jar first. And then he took the pebbles and he shook the pebbles. As he put the pebbles in around the big rocks, he shook the jar, which allowed the pebbles to kind of settle in the cracks between the big rocks. And then when he had all the pebbles down, then he started pouring sand in a bit at a time, and again, shaking the jar to let the sand settle through the cracks that now were in the big rocks and the pebbles, until he had managed to get all of the big rocks, the pebbles, and the sand into the jar. Now, there was one lesson he was really, really focused on when he was giving this talk, and that was that you have to do the big rocks first. And that is really the core of what I want to talk here. But I do have a secondary lesson that he didn't explore, but it was something I took away from this discussion as well. And I'll get into that as well. So the first one is the big rocks. So when we're looking at health and fitness, there are huge boulders typically sitting in front of us when we get started. Eating right, sleeping, stress, getting some exercise, any exercise. What a lot of people will get stuck on is, should I be taking glutathione? What do you think about protein and supplements or pre-workouts and post-workouts? Should I get this little Fitbit thing and wear it on my wrist when I'm walking through the day to get all these steps in? And what's happening there is they're chasing all the different dove, the Fitbit, the this, the that, the that. And they're not really focused on one thing. They're not focused on the big rock. So, when someone comes to me and they're like, what supplements should I take? In my mind, the initial click in is it doesn't really matter unless you have a deficiency. If you have a deficiency that's keeping you from chasing one of your big rocks, then by all means, solve that deficiency. So if you have a blood test and it tells you that you're low in vitamin D and you're low in iron, then yeah, let's work on that, because that's something that you can attend to fairly easily. But to just sit there at the beginning and think that, what are all the supplements I need to do? What are all these other things I need to do? They're little rocks. And as an accountant, I can tell you, if something's going to give you a 2% improvement, and you're starting from zero, well, 2% of zero is zero. Now, if you're an elite athlete, 2% can mean the difference between winning and losing. So I get it that there's a professional athlete that's using cryotherapy as their recovery tool. So should everybody be using cryotherapy? And I'm like, well, that's probably sand when it's all said and done, unless you want to be a competitive athlete and you get yourself trained up to that level. So as you're looking at your health and fitness, you really have to focus on what are the big rocks, and you got to put those in the jar first. If you're not dealing with the big rocks, then you're missing huge opportunities to really improve your health and fitness. And it really is kind of that simple, particularly in the beginning, of what are the big rocks. Now, even as you get into this, there's going to be that aspect of, is this a pebble or sand? Because we have that next stage of, we've gotten all the big rocks in the jar. We feel pretty good about where we are today. Maybe there's a few other, little big rocks, but there's still some big rocks. We can focus on those. But kind of work on those big rocks first, and then we can start talking about pebbles. And if you ever get to the point where you're dealing with sand, well, now you're at an elite level, and that's a whole new game. But we're not playing that game yet. We really need to focus on the big rocks and then some of the pebbles, and focus on the big rocks and the bigger pebbles first. So kind of work your way through these. So nutrition, always going to matter. It's always going to matter. You can always be working on that. Sleep and stress, obviously those are big rocks at the beginning, but there's going to be a point where you hit balance, you feel comfortable. Can you still work on stress? Yes, but if you're not working on your sleep and you're working on stress and you've got your food dialed down, you're still going to struggle, because you have that big rock of sleep that's sitting out there. If you're not exercising and you're eating well, you're sleeping well, and you're low stress, well, exercise is your next big rock, not improving your sleep when you're already sleeping well. So I really want you focused on big rocks, particularly each week as you look at what your strategy is, kind of start defining what are those big rocks for me and how can I move those into my jar. Okay, now the second piece of this, and I won't go too far into this, but there was another aspect of this exercise that a lot of people didn't take away, and I kind of did, is that the pebbles in the sand didn't necessarily give him a whole lot of benefit until he started shaking the jar. So recognizing that it wasn't the fact that he just poured all this stuff in there and then it just fit. He had to be selective. He had to put a little bit of the pebbles in there, and then he had to work it to see what was working, to get it down where it needed to be. So while you see all these little rocks of someone saying you should do cryotherapy, you should try glutathione, you should, all these other things that are popping out there, all those little, dove or rabbit that are running around, they're not benefiting you. You can try one. Once you get to a point where the big rocks are in place, definitely that's the next level. That's the next step in this evolution of yourself, is those little rocks. And you try them, you work them, and then they work their way to a point. Then it's time for you to go ahead and start working on something else if those aren't working. If they are, make them a part of who you are. If drinking lemon water every morning is really helping you feel good, then that's your little rock. You've got that in there. Work it in and make it a habit. So shake that jar, get it down to where it's set. Now it's a part of what you do every morning. You wake up and have your little glass of lemon water. Perfect. Now you can work on something else. So that's kind of the concepts of the rocks, is to really sit down and figure out what's the most important thing for you to put into your jar today. And those are the big rocks. So the question I want to ask you on the conference call today, if you're willing to share, is what is your big rock this week, and what are you going to do to move it into your jar?
Okay. That's a great, by the way, a great lesson. Constantly chasing shiny objects. So my big rock, this basic nutrition in terms of quality, and so I've been trying to use the MyFitnessPal app. The minutia of it just doesn't work for me. So I will, and I'm eat, and when I eat it, I've got a little doll I bought, and I'm hoping that the very act of just writing it, I'm not going to put down macros or calories or anything, because I know what's good and bad. I know a donut's bad, and I know, and eggs and stuff, and I know what I want to eat, but I find myself minding stuff during the day and screwing things up. For the next week, just write it on paper and pen.
Yeah.
And so that's my
I think that's
my biggest rock.
Okay.
So that's my plan.
Okay, and I think that's excellent, because one of the things that you'll notice is in that story, we talked about the putting the rocks. I mean, with the big rocks, there wasn't a ton of shaking or anything to get the big rocks where they needed to be. For the most part, you're putting the big rocks in there. So the simpler you can kind of keep that, the quicker you're going to get that embedded into what you need. If you sit there and stare at those big rocks and say, well, which one would fit best against which one to go in the jar, you're losing effort there. You're burning energy, mental energy or physical energy, either way, to accomplish something. And if that's just not working for you, there's some of us, like me, when I get into it, I can be a big nerd about it and get down to the minutia. At one point, I had my QuickBooks account, my Quicken accounting for myself. I had it. It was literally like the books of GE. I mean, it was like that detailed, which made zero sense whatsoever, other than the fact that I just enjoyed that detail. I enjoyed that time putting that all together and keeping that data together and seeing it over a period of time. So to me, there was an intrinsic value to the doing. But if you're not getting an intrinsic value out of the doing, then the simpler you can make it, the easier it's going to be for you to make that a habit.
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping, to just because I won't want to write it down if it's bad. So if
Okay.
down, then I think I'll make better choices and not, at 7 o'clock, at 10 o'clock. I'm not gonna put that scoop of ice cream in the bowl because I'll have to go write it down.
Okay. And here's another thing I'll add out there.
That's my simple plan for the next week.
If you need this, and I encourage you to consider this strongly, is just realize we do have the community out there, and there is a discussion forum under weight loss. And if you want, you're more than welcome to start a thread there. And I'll be out there. Others will be out there. We can hold you accountable to you doing your daily logging and feeling good about the choices you made each day. If you want to get a living thread out there, feel free to do that as a part of an accountability program.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, no, that actually be fun.
Okay, cool. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I guess it's my turn next.
Okay.
I've got the big rough trifecta coming week. First off, midweek, I'm probably going to become the new medical director of our clinic, and that's going to be a three-year commitment, and it's going to increase my workload. It's a little bit out of. So I'm already feeling a little anxious about that, and it will become reality unless I get voted down. Which if I do, that's fine. But that is one thing. And in preparation for that, this past week I started. My goal is to do some meditation. So I've started with the Headspace app, and I think I'm in a row of intentional meditation time. Just use that a little bit to try to deal with some of the stress that's going to be coming my direction. Second, I'm going with my son this next weekend. Middle school trip. We're going to the Oregon coast, which will be great. It'll be super nice, and the Oregon coast is always a relaxed. I'm going with a bunch of middle schoolers, and healthy eating habits, and I'm sure that some of the options that we have for food are going to be marginal. So I'm going to have to do some prepping and be creative about staying. We're not staying in a hotel. We're staying in a conference center. So I'm going to have to be intentional about making sure that I've at least got some backups for what I'm going to be eating, and then also that will throw off a little bit to the gym. So I've already last night and looked at who Alan have got for me and plugged in where I'm going to be doing body weight. I'm going to substitute a run in because so I think I've got a proactive plan. Rocks that are coming, but they are coming, and I know they're going to be there this next week.
Yeah. Well, first I want to congratulate you on starting the practice of the meditation. I do think that's going to go a long way for you. And being a one-on-one client, when we're on our calls, I'm your partner on this thing. So don't be afraid to vent with me and just go ahead and get some of that negativity out. This is a good opportunity when we're on the calls for you to have that conversation with me and just say, okay, I need to get this off my chest. There's no one else I want to share this with. So, here it is, blah, and just lay it out there, because a lot of times just kind of having it out. And then when you go back to your meditation, now there's kind of a release, and now the meditation can kind of settle in and bring that out. So if you need me for, some of that venting, feel free to do so. And I understand when you take a role like that, you're now, not only dealing with your own stuff, dealing with your patient stuff, you're babysitting a lot of doctors, and they're not the easiest kids to babysit. Yeah. So there's a lot of competing priorities and egos and attitudes and all of that. So I do see where that's going to be a major stress addition to what you're doing. But just realize that you do have support, and you're not alone in this. And then the meditation, again, is going to go a long way. We've talked about box breathing. Consider that as an exercise that you can incorporate as you go forward. And we can talk about other stress protocols and things as you need them. But I think the meditation and the breathing are going to go a long way. The Oregon coast can be beautiful and wonderful. I haven't quite been to Oregon. I've been on some of the North California coast, and it's just really nice country. With a bunch of middle schoolers, though, I think my stress level would pop my head. But that said, it's good that you have a plan. Are you driving yourself, where you're going to have the capacity maybe to go over to a Whole Foods or something like that and pick up some food to have in your room? Are you going to have the capacity to prepare some foods in your room? Those are all research things that you can kind of look to as you go. And my guess is, being on the coast with kids, there's going to be a lot of moving around, a lot of walking. So I think you're going to probably get a little bit more outside moving around exercise than you probably would have gotten otherwise. I do like the idea of having some body weight opportunities and things like that. So just, keep that research going, have a strategy, which it sounds like you're really right there on. So really good stuff. Really glad that you're at that point.